Our protagonist, who was incredibly excited to discover he had grasped a bit of earth magic. He thought he could use the bricks he created, and because of that, the inn was imbued with his mana. This meant he could use the memory magic stored within it, making him even more thrilled with new ideas. Suddenly the scene changed, and the protagonist was stunned. Unable to move or remember anything, we see that he's turned into a crying newborn baby. He wondered if he'd been in some kind of accident. A woman appeared and asked if he was hungry. Seeing her, he wondered if the beautiful woman was his nurse, assuming he was in a hospital. Then she used magic to light up the room, and the protagonist suddenly realized that he had been reborn into another world, where magic actually existed. This was not Japan or the world he once knew. Finally, the woman breastfed the baby, saying it was time to eat. And he blushed when he saw her breasts. Unable to control his body, he began to nurse. He was overjoyed to realize that magic was real here, and this beautiful young woman was his mother. He excitedly thought that being reborn into a new world was amazing, because he got to start a new life as a baby. However, he didn't have a name yet. He heard people calling him Marie's child, and his name seemed to be Ashila. He knew that when he turned 6, there would be a naming ceremony, but for some reason he had a bad feeling about it. Even so, what excited him more than anything was the magic. He noticed there was nothing to light up the room, which meant that in this world, magic could be a part of everyday life. He daydreamed about his own magical powers, trying to light up the room but crying out in frustration when he failed. His mother came to comfort him, and once he calmed down, he decided to try a different approach. First, he needed to observe how his family used magic, then learn from them bit by bit. His mother walked in and asked if he was awake, then used magic to light up the room and picked Ashila up. He noticed that they seemed to be drawing some kind of energy from their bodies to use magic, and he understood that energy was needed to do so. He also realized his vocal cords weren't developed enough to chant spells. After that, he focused on practicing his mana every day for 3 years. But even now, he still couldn't use his magical powers. While his family was always struggling, he was just a 3-year-old child, but poverty was already starting to affect his health. Starting today, he decided he had to find food for himself. He realized there were 2 types of mana, one inside the body and another that existed in the surroundings. The external mana could be drawn into the body through the mouth and merged with the mana already inside. He began absorbing mana from the air, and for the first time, he felt it gradually gathering around his lower abdomen, creating a strange sensation as the 2 streams of mana combined. Just below his stomach, he started trying to control and circulate the mana throughout his body. By doing this, he gradually refined the mana within him. However, he had to wait until he was 6 years old to participate in the naming ceremony and start using magic. Then, he would be able to use simple everyday spells like creating light, starting a fire, and producing water, magical skills that only his parents were able to use. Ever since he was a baby, he had tried time and time again to learn how to use magic and had finally made some progress. He began the process of absorbing mana from the air, drawing it down to his lower abdomen, refining it, then guiding it up to his chest and spreading it to his limbs. As the mana spread throughout his body, he carefully guided it back slowly without interruption. When in the open air, the mana looked like a type of gas, but once it flowed into his body, it felt more like a viscous liquid, giving him a deep sense of the potential power within. As his magic power surged, he focused on gathering it into his palm and releasing it into the ground. He tried to maintain his concentration, not wanting to lose his train of thought, especially since he had stopped at this point last time. He pictured the importance of practice, believing that the vitality of a field depends on the quality of its soil. The soil was soft, loose, and had a faint natural scent, holding precious nutrients. In his previous life, he remembered his grandmother in the countryside, often using synthetic fertilizer on the soil, weeding and tending to the earth to improve its drainage and exposure to sunlight. Thinking about this, he completed his spell and was surprised to find he had succeeded. He noticed the plot of land was about 10 square meters, the terrain uneven because his family were farmers, but the soil in the field was hard and full of weeds. Ashila was surprised that the spell was simple, yet he had succeeded on his very first attempt at using magic in this new life. However, right after, he started to feel hungrier, and wondered if using magic made him even hungrier. Without hesitating, he decided to start farming right away, planting 20 edible seeds. After 20 days, he was so moved he cried, telling himself he no longer cared about a child's pride and began to accept his life in this world. Watering became a challenge, difficult for a 3-year-old. But after the first 5 successful days of using magic, he felt relieved as he improved the soil and used magic every day, turning a portion of the land into a field of loose, fertile soil. Gradually, flowers began to bloom, a sign of a good harvest. But the strange thing was, the flowers bloomed after only 5 days when it should normally take 20. When he tried pulling one up, he was stunned to see that the number of edible tubers was much larger than usual. Normally there should only have been a few, but there were more than 10 large ones. He tried eating one but found the taste wasn't very good. And so his quest to revive the farm began. He continued to improve the soil and began to pay attention to seed selection. He noticed that the vegetables in the field grew incredibly fast, taking only 5 days to be ready for harvest. Even so, he kept eating them to avoid going hungry. Even though he knew the food in his past life was much tastier and more appealing, he was excited that his magic had broken the normal rules of nature. He didn't understand the theory behind it all yet, but watching the vegetables in his garden grow so quickly gave him the idea to take advantage of it. Even though the vegetables currently tasted bad, he hoped he could improve their flavor in the future. But he wondered how could he improve the vegetables' taste. As he went to bed, he remembered a story from class about green peas, where someone tested thousands of peas to discover the principles of heredity. He thought that he didn't have enough varieties of 20s to start crossbreeding, and slowly drifted off to sleep with those thoughts. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that not only were the roots different, but the stems and flowers were slightly different too. Some 20s tubers were black, others were reddish-purple, and some grew in larger clusters. The flowers also had a variety of colors from white to yellow. He cataloged each characteristic and divided the soil into 6 sections based on their distinct traits. At first, he just wanted to secure a food source, but these makeshift experiments gradually became his daily routine. He realized that these vegetables also contained a special kind of magic. The magic he had created combined both internal and external magical power, creating a unique blend that helped him hone his skills and unlock the potential within these vegetables. Each time he cast the spell, the merged magic was consumed. And when he tried to merge it again, he realized he had no internal magic left, making it impossible to continue merging or casting spells. From then on, he wondered how to restore his internal magic faster. He had realized that magic could recover naturally over time, but the pace wasn't fast enough for his needs. After experimenting by eating the vegetables regularly, he concluded that eating them helped his magic recover faster. However, mana didn't recover immediately after eating. It took some time. That's why he hadn't noticed this until now. He asked himself an important question. What kind of food restored the most mana? After trying various types of 20s, he found that the amount of mana recovered differed depending on the variety. Although he couldn't change the vegetable's flavor yet, he decided to put that aside for the time being, and decided to classify the vegetables that could restore the most mana. He felt a thrill of excitement discovering something new every day. He knew for sure that he needed to compare and prioritize the foods that restored the most mana, but this small body of his also had its limits. He wished there was a faster way, and decided to expand his cultivation area. At first, he could only concentrate with his eyes closed, but now he was getting used to using magic without needing to do that. When he cast the spell, he was stunned, wondering to himself how his power could have improved so much. When he heard a strange sound but couldn't pinpoint its origin, he had an idea: to focus refined mana into his eyes to observe. Immediately, he saw a faint blue aura rising from the fields. He pulled up a 20s plant and was thrilled to see that this blue aura was actually radiating from its roots, escaping into the air. He realized that the plants restoring the most mana had the deepest blue hue, and he speculated that this blue color was the mana itself. He continued to observe and eat the vegetables, all while focusing mana into his eyes. After a while, he noticed that the densest clusters of vegetables were also the richest in mana. He began to take notes on his genetic findings. And at 5 years old, he continued to make new discoveries. He realized that the vegetables that restored the most mana didn't produce an immediate effect, and that when he focused mana into his eyes, the information he perceived about objects changed. The blue color of the mana sparked his imagination, making him think that if he focused mana on a different part of his busy life, something else might happen. This train of thought wasn't wrong, but he decided to rest and sleep until the next day. The next day, instead of letting his mana radiate out of his body and seep into the soil, he kept the mana contained within him. Then he tried using body-strengthening magic. Watering his crops became much easier, and he was also able to expand the fields even more. When he concentrated mana into specific parts of his body, he noticed a significant increase in the strength of his arms and legs. He wondered if his muscles could be enhanced. What about his internal organs? If he could strengthen his digestive system, could he absorb mana from the vegetables faster? He gave it a try and felt his absorption and digestion speed increase significantly. All this time, he had been putting a great deal of effort into tailoring his magic usage for each specific situation. But then, one day his father took out his sword and said that he had to leave. His mother, full of worry, told him to be careful and promised that she would wait for him to return safely. She told Ashila that from now on he was in charge of things at home. His father, who had always been the pillar of the family, had to leave because he was summoned to join the war effort. As a large-scale conflict erupted, forcing most of the men in the village to depart. Ashila always felt that the technology in this world was very primitive, and it seemed that war was one of the reasons why. In times of peace, the villagers would work together, gradually clearing land to create surplus farmland, but now, all of that had been disrupted by the war. The village's agriculture depended on the amount of land they owned. If it weren't for the war, there would be more new fields, paving the way for technological development and greater prosperity. This made him realize that his magic, which allowed him to create his own fields, played a crucial role in the current situation. Taxes were calculated based on the area of land used, so his field had a distinct advantage. But what worried him most was the poor quality of the equipment for those who had to go off to fight. They mostly had nothing but farming tools, and he wondered if those would be of any help to them in battle. He feared this could lead to casualties and create turmoil in the village, putting them at risk of losing their homes. With memories from his past life, he didn't want to have to kill anyone, and thought that, at the very least, they would need good weapons and armor, but most importantly, they needed money. However, when he saw his mother stir-frying tubers from the 20s field, he realized a much bigger problem. Life in the village barely generated any income. He thought about it and realized the only way was to rely on merchants. His mother suggested trying to make sandals from the dried 20s stalks, since they could create various products from them and earn a little money for shopping. Although he didn't say it out loud, this seemed quite inefficient in his eyes, because merchants traveled between towns and villages, and they would demand products of higher quality or value to make the transport worthwhile. Ashila realized that selling sandals made from 20s stalks could bring in some income, but he needed to learn how to negotiate prices to get a better profit. His mother taught him how to make the sandals, and he began producing them every day. When a merchant arrived, he praised the quality of the sandals and paid a small amount of money. Ashila was overjoyed when he saw the shiny coins, but was then disappointed to realize it was only 6 old copper coins. He realized the price for the sandals was lower than he'd expected, and at this rate, it would take a very long time to earn enough money for weapons. He called the merchant back and asked a few questions, which is how he learned about the market price. After a few days of research, he decided to try and apply the information he had gathered to increase his income. Later, the merchant revealed something about magic mushrooms, a type of mushroom that could restore magical power but was very rare because it was difficult to cultivate and the supply was scarce. The merchant even gave Ashila some to try. They were very rare, but he found the taste rather bland. Ashila thought about it and came up with the idea that the mushrooms might grow from molds on trees, which would provide the main nutrients for their growth. If he created a suitable environment for the mold to grow, perhaps he could cultivate these mushrooms artificially. This opened up a new business opportunity, one that could bring in a much higher income than selling sandals. Ashila already had a few dry logs, which saved him a lot of effort since the right balance of moisture and dryness was essential. He planted the mold on the wood and waited for it to grow. However, if cultivating magic mushrooms were that easy, surely someone else would have done it long ago. He thought to himself that if these mushrooms had magical properties, they must contain a large amount of magical power. And if they drew nutrients from the trees, then they were probably absorbing magical power from them as well. With this in mind, Ashila tried infusing his own magical power into the logs instead of letting the mushrooms draw it from the trees themselves. He began experimenting by infusing different amounts of magical power into each log. After some time, mushrooms began to sprout, but only 3 of them. Still, it proved the method was effective. To make a profit, he needed to grow them on a larger scale. But his house wasn't big enough to hold everything. Therefore, he needed a separate building to store the mushrooms. When he used magic to create the field, he could raise the earth to form ridges. In the same way, he figured he could probably manipulate the shape of the earth to construct a building. This would be a major challenge in magical architecture for Ashila. Ashila reconsidered and realized he wasn't just trying things at random. He thought about the rules of magic. Creating something from nothing was extremely difficult. Earth magic in games, for example, was when refined magical power within the body was gathered into the palm and used to create pebbles or rocks. The stone's destructive power depended on the speed at which it was launched, and by visualizing the entire process, he could make it happen. Something that was really interesting but incredibly draining in terms of energy. Ashila noticed that earth magic was easier to use when there was something already there for him to manipulate. He found he had a knack for earth magic, but was frustrated by the thought that he could only use his magic when there was earth around. He came up with the idea that if he could transform soil into metal, it would solve the problem. His next challenge was to create a warehouse from the earth itself, and he began to put it into practice by kneeling down and touching the ground. But just as he started to cast the spell, he felt something was wrong and passed out. When he woke up, Ashila saw his worried mother by his side. His head was throbbing, and his mother told him he had been bedridden for 2 days. He realized the reason for his sudden collapse was that all the magical energy in his body had been completely drained. His magical energy had been circulating throughout his body to power his physical enhancement magic, and this had caused the depletion. Although it was a failure, Ashila learned an important lesson. A failed spell doesn't have too many severe consequences. Normally, his magical energy shouldn't have been drained so completely, but the reason for the rapid consumption lay in the relationship between surface area and volume. Simply put, he had consumed 10 times the necessary amount of magical energy due to the dimensional discrepancy. Ashila decided to give up on constructing the building for now, and instead focus on creating the building materials. Architectural magic was still a distant dream, so he decided to take it one step at a time. After successfully making a single brick, he created a simple structure, but it looked so dull that it made him feel like a mere apprentice. Afterward, he ran to his ancestors' mosaic land, a plot that had been farmed for generations and was now unsuitable for cultivation. He had always been secretly proud of his village's unique charm, and he used his magic to clear the plot, turning all the stones and tree stumps into fertilizer for the soil. Ashila laid out his plan. He would need to use soil improvement magic, body enhancement magic, and brick creation magic. However, the soil improvement spell took a considerable amount of time. He sat down, touching the earth to enhance its quality. Every time he used magic, he had to recite an incantation, as it required a great deal of time and effort to cast a spell successfully. This time, however, he was surprised when the magic activated the very moment he recited the chant, even though he previously had to clearly visualize what he wanted to accomplish. He was thrilled to realize he had developed his own form of magic, which he called chant creation, and this method was far more effective than he had imagined. Ashila contemplated using magic with fewer chants, which made him all the more eager to explore his power. He felt exhausted but was also incredibly grateful that the magic could activate right after he recited the incantation. He tried again, further improving the quality of the soil, noticing that the spell had an effective range of about 10 square meters when he used the chant, ensuring the effect was stable without requiring too much adjustment. He thought that if he could adjust the amount of magical energy consumed based on the spell's range, things would become much easier, but he still wondered how that was even possible. He began to experiment by muttering "create brick," and as he touched the ground, it instantly turned into a brick. After that, he continued to practice, muttering the word brick even in his sleep. And after several months, he could produce bricks of the exact same size and mass, almost like a conditioned reflex, just like how hearing a bell might make someone salivate. He had developed a similar reflex for when he cast his spells. Finally, he developed a new technique he called chanting, and decided to apply it to his other spells like body enhancement and land preparation. However, the villagers grew a little worried, seeing how obsessed Ashila had become with his experiments and the sheer number of bricks he was stockpiling, when his mother joked that if those bricks were dishes, they'd at least be useful. Ashila began to wonder if he could create bowls from the earth, just as he had done with the bricks. This sparked a new idea for him. Maybe this raw material could also be turned into useful household items. Ashila transformed the earth into cups and plates, but his mother wasn't very impressed with the ordinary clay bowls. Taking it as a challenge, Ashila decided to focus on quality over quantity and created a set of white porcelain cups and saucers. His mother was surprised and praised them, as she had never seen such pure-looking dinnerware. This made Ashila realize that perhaps he didn't need to strictly adhere to standard materials when using magic. He continued to experiment, and created a cup with a flower painted on it. But the clumsy drawing made him realize he had no talent for painting. Undeterred, Ashila decided to create other items besides white porcelain. He remembered that sea sand could be used to make glass. So he created a transparent glass cup, an item never before seen in the village and perhaps not even in the surrounding regions. His next challenge was to increase the production of magic mushrooms. Just then, the merchant appeared and called out his name, saying he had something to discuss. Ashila was delighted, as this was the perfect opportunity to sell some of the items he had made. However, the merchant instead asked to buy some spare bricks from his house, which surprised Ashila. He asked again to confirm and excitedly said he had also created some new items. But the merchant seemed confused, not understanding what he was talking about. The merchant told Ashila to call his parents to negotiate the sale of the bricks. Ashila replied that he had plenty of bricks, but the merchant was only interested in buying them now and promised to look at the pottery next time. Ashila looked at him with dissatisfaction, insisting that he wouldn't regret passing up the chance to buy his pottery, and finally the merchant agreed to take a look. Upon seeing Ashila's pottery, the merchant was astonished and asked him how he had created such items. He then agreed to buy both the bricks and the pottery, but Ashila was disappointed when he only received 5 copper coins. He grabbed the merchant and angrily asked if he took him for a naive child who knew nothing. The startled merchant explained that he had paid more than the usual rate, and that the villagers couldn't afford to spend much money on such luxury items. The merchant explained that rich people don't trade with peddlers like him, but only deal with established merchants. Ashila thought about marketing his products to the nobility, those who were willing to pay, but there was no way to reach them in a world without the internet or newspapers. He felt frustrated and thought that talking to this merchant was a waste of time. Seeing Ashila's sad expression, the merchant consoled him by saying the market for bricks was very stable, and promised to buy all the bricks he had next time. When the merchant came the next time, Ashila had prepared 10 times the amount of bricks. The merchant was surprised and said he had brought someone strong to help transport them. Ashila was surprised to see the animal the merchant brought, and seeing his confused look, the merchant asked if he had ever heard of a dragon horse, explaining that it was a very strong work beast. We learn that work beasts are creatures raised from eggs to assist their owners. Work beasts born this way are very loyal to their master or parent. The work beast's egg develops by absorbing magical energy from its owner, and its form depends on the type of magic provided, meaning its appearance will reflect the characteristics of the one who hatched it. For this reason, those who can create unique or useful working beasts are highly valued. As the merchant loaded the bricks onto the back of a dragon horse, he explained that incredibly powerful dragons existed in this world, and that this working beast, which resembled a dragon, was famous for its strength, endurance, and courage. Additionally, there were super durable working horses and flying working birds that were also very popular. Ashila curiously asked if working beasts were expensive, and the merchant confirmed that dragon horses, or any beast that could be used for transportation, were valuable assets. Pondering this, Ashila realized that even though bricks were in high demand now, there was no guarantee they would always be popular. He decided he needed to diversify the goods he could sell, but having never been born from an egg himself, he had no idea how the hatching process worked. Ashila called the merchant over and said he wanted to try raising a working beast egg, suggesting the merchant bring an egg with him next time, and he would buy it. The price of the egg the merchant brought nearly wiped out all the money he had saved up. Ashila's mother was furious, unable to believe he had spent all their money just to buy a working beast egg, asking him what on earth he was thinking. Ashila explained that after the egg hatched, they would make a lot more money, but his mother disagreed. She said if it were that easy, everyone would be rich. She argued that buying a working beast egg was no different from gambling away their entire fortune, since many people had been tricked into buying random animal eggs that rarely, if ever, actually hatched. Ashila retorted that he had earned the money himself and wanted to use it for his future, but his mother scoffed, reminding him that not all of that money was his. Hadn't he been selling the sandals that everyone in the family made together? Finally, she laid down the law. From now on, Ashila was forbidden from buying anything without her permission. He bowed his head and apologized, realizing he had made a huge mistake. He shuddered to see how his mother, who was still so young and beautiful, could become so terrifying when she was angry. He blamed himself, as he was the one responsible for making the bricks and selling them to the merchant, and now everything depended on whether this egg would hatch a useful working beast. Ashila made a net bag from the stems of a 20s plant to hold the egg and carry it safely with him. He wondered if he could get several people to channel their magical power into the egg to help it hatch, But he realized that everyone's magic was different, which made it difficult to incubate the same type of working beast together. As he held the egg in his hands, he could feel it drawing magical power from him. Ashila poured magical power into his eyes to see more clearly, and saw the egg emitting a blue mist. He noticed that the egg contained very little magical power, yet it emitted this blue aura. When he chanted the spell Channel Magical Power, he saw the blue color deepen and the magical power he channeled into it get absorbed. However, he wasn't sure how much magical power he needed to use for this. Every day, Ashila channeled magical power into the egg while being supervised by others. He began to think that perhaps he needed a private hideout. And just as his mother had said, he was still a child and shouldn't be spending money on his own. Although he hated being treated like a kid, he started saving money so he could buy a good weapon, as it would be important for making a name for himself during wartime. Ashila thought about his future. As a younger son, he knew he would either have to live under the control of his eldest brother or strike out on his own. Therefore, in addition to preparing a weapon, he decided to get ready for an independent life. His village was surrounded by a fence, and beyond it lay a dense forest. In the past, when the lands were safer, trees were cut down and the land was cultivated to expand the village. However, with the constant warfare, the amount of farmland was gradually shrinking. Leaving his house, Ashila decided to find a place to build his hideout. Using body reinforcement magic, he was able to avoid fatigue despite the strenuous work. He started by touching the ground and removing tree stumps, causing the stumps to lose their strength to support the tree trunks. He continued to use magic to clear the area, flattening a 10 by 4 meter area with compacted earth, creating a large area to lay the foundation for a storage shed. He figured that if he built the entire house at once, the amount of mana required would depend not only on the area but also on the internal volume. This would make the mana consumption wasteful and dangerous. In the end, he decided to build each wall individually. He began the process, using mortar to set the bricks as he visualized a complete wall. As he cast the spell, the bricks began to automatically assemble and take shape, and he completed his hideout in the forest in no time. When he stepped out and looked at the egg, he noticed it had grown much larger and its magical aura had turned a deep blue, signaling that it might be about to hatch. Returning home, his mother came to him and said that it was almost time. Ashila was delighted to realize that he would be turning 6 years old this year, entering an important stage of his life. When a person turns 6, they participate in a baptism ceremony at the village church. Today was Ashila's special day. When they arrived at the church, Ashila wondered why he couldn't remember the baptism from his past life. Perhaps because he wasn't very happy back then. But now, the naming ceremony would take place during this baptism, and he eagerly awaited this moment. Upon seeing Ashila, the priest raised his hand, signaling the start of the ritual. Ashila was thrilled because after today he would officially be able to use his family's magic. For generations, humanity had always had to hide from the threat of monsters. But the family magic gave them a basic means of self-defense, helping to expand the lands they could inhabit. Thanks to magic, humanity, who couldn't defeat monsters on their own, was able to build large and prosperous settlements. The priest began the ceremony, and now Ashila's naming ceremony officially commenced, marking a new turning point in his life. During the baptism, all citizens would receive the family magic. The priest announced that they would perform the ritual for each person one by one and asked everyone to wait patiently for their turn. As a key driver of population growth, the church had attracted many followers, and the feudal lord had re-established a registration system, as well as a system to ensure everyone could benefit from the magic. Ashila sat before the priest, who explained that through this naming ceremony, he would receive the divine protection of the gods and the ability to use magic. He also stressed that this magic should only be used to improve people's lives, and asked him to swear not to abuse it. Ashila promised to keep that vow. As the priest raised his hand, Ashila focused mana into his eyes to observe, seeing that the magical energy was concentrating in the priest's palm. The priest created a magic circle, and Ashila was stunned to see his memory preservation spell activate automatically, helping him efficiently store the new memory. The magic circle sent new information directly into his mind, granting him the ability to use the family magic. Ashila tried casting a light spell and realized that the family magic consisted of basic skills. He understood that the effectiveness of the magic didn't change whether the user was a child just learning it or an adult who had used it for years. Even as a person's mana increased, the power of the family magic, like the ability to create fire, showed no significant improvement. This disappointed Ashila, as he had hoped that after receiving the family magic, he would be able to use types of magic other than his earth magic. However, he decided to set aside improving the family magic for the time being. Recalling another of his accomplishments, he thought of his father's magic circle. Ashila wondered if he would ever be able to understand more about this world's magic. Despite his best efforts, he was still confused and sleep-deprived because he couldn't decipher the ancient characters, let alone the modern ones of this era. Suddenly, he heard a cracking sound from the egg. Looking over, he realized it was about to hatch. Approaching nervously, Ashila wondered what kind of work creature would be born from this egg. As the creature inside the egg began to struggle, Ashila wondered if he should give it a little help. Finally, as the eggshell cracked wide open, a beautiful little horse emerged. Immediately, the foal tried to get up, and Ashila was amazed that it could already stand. He encouraged the little horse, and it finally stood steady, prompting Ashila to clap joyfully and wave his hands in front of it, thanking it for coming into his life. Ashila took a closer look at the foal and noticed it resembled a small reindeer. He said that when it grew up, it would be big enough to help him carry things. The little horse began to eat its own eggshell, and Ashila wondered if it was okay for it to eat the eggshell. He wondered what this creature would eat, since the diet of a working beast from birth depends on the type of magical power it's nurtured with, which also affects its behavior. Ashila wondered what dragon horses ate since they were very efficient but didn't eat meat, and providing meat every day would be too hard for a poor farming family. Thinking, he remembered he had some extra radishes growing in his hideout, so he went and brought some over. The little horse tried the radishes and ate them all up, making Ashila sigh in relief that he wouldn't have to worry about going broke just to feed it. The horse stared intently at him, as if committing its new master to memory. The small horse climbed onto Ashila's lap, curled up and began to snore softly, which made him blush at how adorable it was. 10 days passed, and the horse had grown, now carrying an air of dignity. Although he had grown attached, Ashila decided to sell it to keep his feelings from getting in the way of his original goal. Still, he wanted to give the horse a special name. Sensing that family magic was imprinted on the mind through a magic circle, he figured this horse must also have some magical power and could at least create its own clean drinking water. Suddenly, the name Valkyrie popped into his mind, and Ashila was surprised by how well it suited the horse's shimmering silver-white coat, which made it look like a divine creature. When he asked if it liked the name Valkyrie, the horse nodded, delighting Ashila, who thought it might actually understand human speech. He began the naming ceremony slowly and carefully, feeling like a vessel overflowing with dense magical power. Keeping the magic stable wasn't easy, but Ashila continued step by step, completing the naming ritual with all the solemnity and emotion he felt for Valkyrie. Ashila focused all his effort on recreating every detail of the magic circle he had memorized, using threads of mana to control magic outside his body, a feat that demanded immense concentration. Finally, he successfully created the magic circle and officially named the horse Valkyrie. Once it was complete, Ashila sank to his knees, realizing the ritual had taken more out of him than he'd anticipated. To test her magic, he and Valkyrie went outside to avoid causing any danger indoors. Valkyrie tried a light spell, astonishing Ashila. He encouraged her to try other kinds of magic, and Valkyrie immediately demonstrated her family magic abilities. However, what truly stunned Ashila was that she could make bricks float and even use the memory preservation spell, something he thought only those named during a church baptism could do. Curious, Ashila asked Valkyrie to look at a clay pot and try to create one just like it, but she couldn't. He realized Valkyrie could only use the same spells he had become able to use after his own naming ceremony. For example, he could resize and flatten land, with the mana cost corresponding to the area, and Valkyrie could do the same. Ashila concluded that Valkyrie's magical abilities were directly linked to what he had already learned and mastered. Ashila noticed that Valkyrie's ability to flatten land was limited to an area of 10 square meters. He began to wonder if naming rituals were more of a system than a form of divine protection, and realized they were limited by the spells mastered by the namer, with no room for customization. This explained why family magic could never be improved. Ashila praised Valkyrie and wondered if it was even safe to sell her, since she could use not only family magic but his own original spells as well. When he asked the merchant if working beasts could use magic, the merchant thought for a moment before replying that he had never heard of such a thing. Ashila figured that if a merchant who had traveled and traded far and wide had never heard of it, it must be incredibly rare. The merchant, excited to hear about Valkyrie's special ability, asked Ashila for a demonstration of her magic. However, Ashila was careful to warn Valkyrie not to use his personal magic in front of others, keeping her unique abilities a secret. Ashila agreed to let the merchant see Valkyrie, and when she appeared, the man was amazed by her pure white coat and her load-carrying capacity. When the merchant offered to buy Valkyrie, Ashila surprised him by refusing, explaining that even though he had originally bought the egg to make money, he had grown attached to Valkyrie and wanted to keep her with him. The merchant, also impressed with his magical abilities, realized that he would be a powerful assistant, even stronger than a child. Seeing this, the merchant made an offer. He had 5 other work beast eggs and was willing to give them to Ashila. He suggested that after Ashila raised the work beast from these eggs, he could sell them, and the merchant assured him it wouldn't be hard to find buyers if they were raised by Ashila. Even though he might take a loss at first, the potential profit would be enough to make up for it. Ashila, hearing this, began to set the terms for the deal. He emphasized that he would set some minimum requirements to protect his own interests. Seeing him lay down conditions, the merchant had a bad feeling. Worrying that Ashila would negotiate a more favorable deal for himself, Ashila realized that raising work beasts from eggs might be the best way a farmer could hope to make money. He was determined to grow this business and work hard. One day, he saw Valkyrie take one of the eggs, which made him panic and scream, telling her she wasn't allowed to eat it. But Valkyrie confirmed that she was just keeping it safe. Ashila asked if Valkyrie intended to raise these eggs, and she touched her nose to an egg, using her magic to transfer mana. He was surprised to see that she could transfer mana into the eggs. Valkyrie explained that mana from multiple people could be used to incubate eggs, but it required a significant amount of mana. Ashila decided to entrust the task of incubating the eggs to Valkyrie, and asked her to take good care of them. Remembering his past life, Ashila recalled how he once brought home a stray dog. His mother had been furious and asked if he was capable of taking care of it. Despite being scolded by his parents, he was eventually allowed to keep the dog, promising that he would truly look after it. Back then, he simply thought it meant feeding the dog and taking it for walks, forgetting that other costs like food, vaccinations, and medical care were all paid for by his parents. Now, looking back, he realized his parents had been right. Taking care of a living creature really requires a lot of responsibility and effort. Smiling, Ashila found that raising the eggs was just as challenging as raising a puppy. However, he was determined to care for them until they hatched safely. Each work beast Ashila raised from an egg was a little bigger and looked exactly the same. By ensuring the safety of each one, he had completed the first stage. Now, to continue growing his work beast breeding business, he had to expand the number of fields by clearing the forest around his hideout. So Ashila decided to use his old method, softening the soil around the tree roots, pulling the trees out from the roots, and then using soil improvement magic. Just as he finished preparing, he was surprised to realize that it wasn't him, but the little horses that were also using magic. Amazed, Ashila wondered how they could use magic without being named yet. He thought that perhaps work beasts followed different rules than humans, not needing a name to be able to use magic. He wondered if Valkyrie could ask them not to use magic and if they would listen. Determined to expand the area of his fields, Ashila continued his work. After finishing, he looked at the vast area before him, which looked like a section of the forest had been completely cleared. The area was so large that he couldn't take in its width in a single glance. Ashila, with his knowledge of environmental protection from his previous life, wondered if he was causing any harm. But when he looked closer, he noticed that this area had once been fields that the forest had reclaimed after the population decreased and the land was abandoned. The forest was so vast that the village had permitted the expansion of the fields. If he wanted to raise large work beasts like Valkyrie, a grazing area would be just as necessary as fields. However, the larger the area, the more difficult it was to get around. And to ensure safety and save energy when fighting, Ashila realized he needed to find a faster way to travel. When Valkyrie came to his side, he had the idea of riding her. And even though Valkyrie wasn't a horse, he thought a saddle and stirrups might still work. But after asking around, he learned that no one in the village could make a saddle or stirrups for a work beast. They suggested that using a cart would probably be fine, since work beasts were usually used to pull carts rather than being ridden. Even so, Ashila still wanted to learn to ride Valkyrie, thinking that if he ever had to go to a battlefield one day, being able to ride the Valkyrie would be a huge advantage. In this world, it was common knowledge that cavalry had a significant advantage over infantry. Determined to test it out, he climbed onto the Valkyrie's back. Ashila realized that controlling a living creature at will was a necessary skill, but riding the Valkyrie was easier than he had imagined. With the Valkyrie's exceptional intelligence, thanks to being nurtured with his mana, she moved carefully so as not to put any strain on him. Ashila thanked her, pleased that he could ride without a saddle. But suddenly he started feeling dizzy and nauseous, like motion sickness. He wondered how riding a work beast could make him feel so terrible and realized he would need more practice to get used to riding the Valkyrie. Ashila's entire body ached after each session of riding the Valkyrie. He realized that even though the Valkyrie tried to move gently, the vibrations were unavoidable. To stabilize himself, he decided to grip the Valkyrie's body tightly with both hands and tense his entire body to maintain his balance. By doing so, he significantly reduced the feeling of shaking. However, his body was still sore that night, and he wondered if having a saddle and protective gear would make it better. Even so, Ashila was determined to continue his riding practice every day. As he was preparing for bed, his older brother remarked that he often muttered something before falling asleep. Ashila frantically denied it, but in truth, he was teaching himself magic and testing new spells. During this process, he noticed that when he focused mana into his eyes, he could see a faint blue aura emanating from everyone, like mana leaking from their bodies. He wondered what would happen if he prevented his mana from escaping. Ashila discovered that keeping the mana within his body greatly improved his recovery abilities. As he experimented, he realized that the physical enhancement spell not only made him stronger, but also had a lingering effect after being cast. He pondered how to optimize his magic to maintain his body's recovery, even during sleep. The next morning, his body had completely recovered, allowing him to continue his riding practice without any hesitation. Just then, the merchant came to visit, bringing a new egg and offering to let Ashila incubate it. Ashila was surprised to see that the work beast from the eggs the merchant had brought before had grown much faster than expected. He thought it would take 1 or 2 hatching cycles, but the work beast had grown exceptionally well. When he asked about this, the merchant explained that although there were many eggs, they usually didn't hatch all at once, and each egg typically took over a month to hatch. Ashila wondered if injecting them with mana was the reason they grew so quickly. When the merchant said he could sell them right away, Ashila wondered what he should do and what the buyer's intentions would be. The merchant confessed that he initially had no intention of selling them. Ashila asked if the merchant intended to use them for his own work, and the merchant laughed, saying that was indeed the plan. He said that first, he would be giving some of these work beasts away for free. Ashila was disappointed to hear that, but the merchant explained that in order to sell products to the nobility, the ones who govern this land, he needed to build relationships and credibility. The merchant explained that merchants like him, who traveled from village to village, often lack the necessary connections to handle expensive items. To sell to the nobility, you need credit and strong relationships. Because the shops that cater to nobles often have exclusive dealings, making it difficult for newcomers to break in. The merchant added that expensive products could only be sold to the nobility, but he had neither the connections nor the reputation to even meet them. Ashila asked if this was a case of the merchant once owning a rare luxury item but failing to sell it because he lacked a go-between. The merchant admitted this sheepishly and said that this time, if he gifted a valuable work beast, things would be different. He explained that a rideable work beast, recognized as useful and valuable, could be a crucial strategic asset, especially in times of war. The merchant added that gifting this work beast, a highly sought-after item, would help him establish a solid relationship with the nobility. If the nobles were pleased, they might buy more in the future and even introduce him to other nobles. When Ashila asked for more clarification, the merchant explained that the nobles who ruled this land could not be ignored. In terms of social standing, it would give him a chance to advance in the work beast business. Ashila realized that if the merchant sold a strategically valuable work beast to a nobleman, it would open up many new opportunities for both the merchant and himself. Opportunities to access high-end markets and build stronger connections with the nobility. Ashila, along with the merchant and his father, left his village for the first time to go to where the nobles lived. They traveled a rough road for 3 days and arrived in Fontana, the place where the nobles resided. For Ashila, this was his first exciting journey, and he was amazed by the bustling activity of the place. When the merchant showed Ashila and his father a part of the town that was being expanded, he realized why bricks were in such high demand. The merchant explained that they were tearing down and rebuilding a section of the wall to expand the town, but even after reusing bricks, the supply still wasn't enough. Hearing this, Ashila asked if the merchant thought the demand for bricks would continue for long. The merchant nodded, saying that with the current pace of development, the demand for bricks would likely remain steady or even increase as the town expanded. He said they could still produce bricks locally in Fontana for now, so it would probably be a while before they needed to import them. Hearing that, Ashila understood that profiting from selling bricks wouldn't last forever. He decided that this meeting with the nobility was a crucial opportunity. A man named Raymond, the negotiator for the Fontana family, appeared and introduced himself. They bowed to him respectfully, and Ashila felt a thrill of excitement at the chance to see a nobleman's house. Raymond said that according to the information he'd received, these work beasts could be ridden. The merchant confirmed it, asserting they were of high quality and could be ridden even while wearing armor. He added that they would be honored to introduce the work beast to Lord Fontana, and Raymond stepped forward to ask about Ashila. The merchant explained that Ashila was the one who had raised the work beast, and the man beside him was his father. Raymond remarked that Ashila's ability to raise work beasts seemed to have long-term potential, and the merchant confirmed it, introducing the Valkyrie to him. Ashila was stunned to hear the name Valkyrie mentioned, but the merchant skillfully asked Raymond for permission so they could demonstrate the Valkyrie's full capabilities to the Fontana family. Ashila was dismayed as the merchant and Raymond discussed producing and selling Valkyries because to him, that was the name of his first work beast, not a name for the entire species. The real Valkyrie was back looking after the village, and he had no intention of selling her. Raymond agreed to grant them a license and encouraged them to continue working hard. He approached the work beasts and commented that they might not be useful in war, because their horns would get in the way of using weapons. Then, Raymond called someone over and ordered them to cut off the work beast horns. Ashila was horrified and about to protest, but his father stopped him. He couldn't believe they were willing to hurt the work beasts the moment they received them. Ashila seethed with anger as he watched their horns get sawed off. At the end, Ashila blamed himself for holding back instead of protecting the work beasts. His father reminded him that even though their horns were cut off, they didn't cry out at all, which reminded Ashila of guide dogs that were trained not to bark even when injured. He felt a pang of guilt for not realizing the work beast's loyalty and teared up as he thought about it. His father tried to comfort him and asked what was really bothering him. Ashila replied that what worried him more than the physical pain was the possibility that cutting the horns could shorten their lifespan. Ashila was worried that if the work beasts died early because their horns were removed, they might get the blame. Despite his anger over the horns being cut, he realized that in order to continue the work beast business, he needed to investigate this more thoroughly. His father remarked that he was being very calm, but Ashila replied that he was just trying to accept his lowly position as a peasant. His father smiled and reminded him that even as a peasant with no formal education, he was not an ignorant man. Even with his knowledge from a past life, there were things his father noticed that Ashila didn't. Ashila, despite being just a child, had expanded their land by clearing the forest in a short amount of time, which led the villagers to whisper that he might struggle to pay his taxes. The village chief even planned to seize his fields as a way to punish him for changing the land so quickly. He realized that on top of the work beast business, just holding onto and protecting what he had built would be a major challenge going forward. Ashila's father had been working hard to convince the noble family governing the region that raising work beasts required a vast amount of land. They needed to expand their farming to provide enough resources for the breeding. However, the amount of wheat they produced wasn't enough to pay the taxes on such a large plot of land. Raising work animals and clearing forests were also things the nobles desired. Fortunately, they received a permit that allowed them to own land and pay taxes in cash instead of wheat. Ashila's father suggested that since they were in town, they should look around and buy some necessities. Ashila felt happy to have a father he could trust and thought to himself how lucky he was. As they walked around town, Ashila noticed there weren't many wooden buildings and wondered if wood wasn't popular here. His father explained that wooden buildings weren't common for safety and durability reasons. Many places preferred brick or stone for their fire resistance and longer lifespan. Ashila's father explained that wooden buildings were vulnerable to fire due to ignition magic. Even so, most buildings in town had few windows because they could use magic for lighting. Ashila realized this was related to his family's magic and the divine protection, though he still wondered if this power was truly connected to the gods. Seeing a window, Ashila had an idea. Glass might be in higher demand because it's more convenient and easier to use. He thought that if he tweaked his magic a little, he could mass-produce glass just like bricks, meeting the demand from construction projects. Ashila's father told the merchant that Ashila always surprised him, and that thanks to the radishes he grew, the village had started to thrive. The merchant overheard this, and Ashila's father recounted the harsh past when crop failures made it easy for people to starve, and prolonged droughts devastated the land. In the context of war, famine led to conflicts over food. At that moment, the merchant took notice of Ashila's radishes, wondering why this vegetable, which grew wild everywhere, was getting so much attention. However, when he tried one of Ashila's radishes, the merchant found it to be crisp, firm, and quite pleasant tasting, a significant improvement over the bitter, hard-to-eat wild kind. He concluded that if radishes of this quality became widespread, they would surely help reduce starvation. This new type of radish came from a village near the northern forest. When the merchant visited that village, he was astonished because villages back then were usually dark, stuffy, and dull. However, when he arrived at Ashila's village, he noticed it was different. Impressed, the merchant asked a barrage of questions about what else the village had to offer. After buying a large quantity of radishes and sandals, he met with other farmers and helped them cultivate this new radish. A few years later, Ashila began to introduce new products to the merchant besides sandals, like the magic mushrooms that grew in the forest, which he had mentioned before. However, since going into the forest could be dangerous for a young boy, the merchant advised Ashila to wait until he was older. Despite that, Ashila was confident he could handle himself and promised to be careful. The merchant was worried, especially since many young people had faced danger and lost their lives in the forest before. But Ashila once again showed him a pottery set he had made himself, which astonished the merchant and made him question the boy's origins. The merchant had once speculated that Ashila might be a noble, or from a fallen noble family, but all those guesses were wrong. After Ashila was baptized, the merchant was surprised again when he saw that the work animal the boy had raised turned out to be a rare and valuable type of horse. Even though Ashila had started selling bricks and magic mushrooms, he was constantly looking for new products to sell. When the merchant asked why he was trying so hard to earn money, Ashila replied that he wanted weapons to join the war. The merchant thought that perhaps Ashila wished to restore his family's honor through battlefield achievements, but that was also a mistaken assumption. Regardless, he realized that Ashila was an important person with great influence and a promising future. In order to establish a solid relationship with Ashila, the merchant decided he needed to secure exclusive rights to trade the work animals the boy produced. He was determined to maintain this relationship at all costs, especially for when Ashila came of age and joined the nobility. He hoped that Ashila would trust him completely. On the way back to the village, Ashila asked the merchant if they could do a little more shopping, and the merchant agreed with a smile. When they returned to the village, Ashila rushed to hug his mother, who came out to greet him, after several days of exploring the town and buying necessities. They had bought a large saw to clear the felled trees, a cart to transport crops, and the fine liquor his father had requested. However, the money Ashila had earned from his dealings with the merchants was starting to run out. Therefore, he decided that his main source of income from now on would be from selling the work animals. He priced the Valkyrie work beasts on par with other expensive working animals like draft dragons, and considered them valuable assets. Ashila hoped that the Valkyries would become a special product line, like luxury vehicles exclusively for those who could afford the high price. Ashila felt frustrated about having to do something undesirable to maintain his business. He wondered why the Fontana clan demanded that the work beast's horns be cut off upon delivery. In the past, he had cut the antlers off deer to prevent them from getting hurt while fighting, and he wanted to think carefully about whether this was okay. Ashila realized that if he treated the work beasts like livestock, a type of commodity, then cutting their horns might be necessary. With determination and a bit of guilt, Ashila cut the horns off 2 of the work beasts. After a few days, he noticed that the dehorned work beasts were still very healthy, but what was striking was that they could no longer use magic. When he focused his mana into his eyes, he saw that the work beasts still retained their magical energy, but they couldn't use it effectively. He recalled his father saying that even humans who lost both hands in battle would lose their ability to use magic. This information could be useful for Ashila. He also remembered the merchant saying he'd never heard of work beasts that could use magic, as that could cause a lot of trouble. If the Valkyries could incubate their own eggs with mana, his exclusive source of profit would be threatened. Ashila felt relieved to realize that even after cutting their horns, the work beasts retained their business value while limiting their ability to use magic, something that could keep his income stream stable and exclusive. Ashila saw that cutting the horns wasn't life-threatening to the work beasts, so he decided to dehorn all the ones he sold to the merchants. When the priest asked Ashila if he had brought back anything special, Ashila thought he was referring to the permit from the Fontana clan. But the priest explained that it wasn't just a permit to sell work beasts, but another valuable document. The priest revealed that this document officially recognized Ashila's right to develop the forest. This wasn't just about paying taxes, it also recognized his ownership rights over the forest north of the village. The priest explained that because the taxes were paid in cash, he wasn't restricted to using the land for agriculture. meaning he could use the land for any purpose. Ashila was confused, and the priest went on to explain that the Fontana clan had recognized him as a land-ruling family. In Fontana territory, the nobility doesn't completely control everything. Instead, ruling clans are given the right to manage a piece of land and enjoy certain privileges, on the condition that they pay taxes in cash and provide military support when needed. When Ashila asked if he was really considered a ruling clan, the priest said the Fontana clan might have intended to grant him the land as a way to tie him down since he wasn't the firstborn son, so they probably didn't want him moving to another land to develop his work beasts. They likely never imagined that a child could become so successful as to compete with other ruling clans. He realized that somehow he had attained a special status. Recalling the priest's advice, he began to think about expanding his land as much as possible, taking advantage of the rights this precious document granted him. Ashila, despite being underestimated, was determined to go further. He rode a Valkyrie through the forest, using magic to soften the soil and fell trees. The hornless horses would then drag the trees to one spot, and after leveling the barren land with magic, he realized that simply expanding his land wasn't enough to increase his income. Even though he was selling work beasts, he still needed a stable source of revenue, and the demand for special bricks seemed to be ending soon. Moreover, harvesting magic mushrooms and farming also required more manpower. Ashila decided to hire people to help with the simple tasks, like cutting branches to make logs for growing mushrooms, farming, harvesting, and storing produce in the warehouse. Since the village primarily relied on a bartering system, he had to manage his money carefully. As night fell, he thought about finding a part-time job so he could focus on his pioneering projects. Ashila started by consulting his father about who in the village could help, hoping to build a reliable team to support his work and develop the land. That evening, the meal consisted of white bread and soup made from improved wheat. Ashila and his older brother Beto were also there, and Beto showed interest in the part-time work, which disappointed Ashila because he was looking for actual employees, not to share the work with his own brother. Beto stood up and confidently declared that he would work with the younger kids and assured Ashila that everything would be fine. When he asked his mother, she said that as long as Ashila and Beto helped out during the wheat harvest, it would be all right. Ashila was conflicted and worried, knowing that if Beto actually worked seriously, he would have no complaints. But since Beto often shirked his responsibilities to go play, Ashila worried that his brother would cause trouble or be inefficient, and he even considered firing Beto if necessary. When Ashila asked Beto what he really wanted, Beto excitedly said he desperately wanted to ride the Valkyrie. Ashila understood his brother's motivation and felt he needed to manage Beto very closely if he wanted the work to go smoothly. Beto complained that it wasn't fair that only Ashila got to ride the Valkyrie. Hearing this, Ashila asked if his brother really liked the Valkyrie that much. Beto confirmed, saying that any man would be captivated by the idea. Looking at Beto from an employer's perspective, Ashila found his brother tactless for immediately criticizing his hideout, calling it a real prison. This didn't make a good impression. But Ashila decided it was a good time to experiment and improve his architectural knowledge. On his last trip to town, Ashila had paid close attention to the structure of the inn where they stayed overnight, from its exterior to the layout of the rooms. He didn't just observe, he also used his mana to meticulously examine every single brick of the building, channeling focused mana into the bricks to feel their durability and structure. Ashila carefully spread a thin, even layer of mana throughout the building, and finally activated the spell in that state. Beto, watching, was astonished to see Ashila memorize the inn's entire structure perfectly, without any mistakes. He remembered that the first time Ashila tried to scan a large building all at once, he had fainted from mana depletion. He realized the cause was using his mana to fill the empty spaces inside instead of just focusing on the structure. This time, Ashila only passed his mana through the bricks and memorized the structure that made up the building, which helped him conserve mana. Relying on his memory of the shape created by his mana, Ashila was confident he could replicate the inn in a single attempt. He began by infusing mana into the earth to create bricks as building material, then recreated the shape he had memorized with mana, and finally replaced that magical structure with bricks and mortar. Looking at his creation, Ashila was amazed that he had managed to replicate the inn almost perfectly. However, since the inn in town was supported by the surrounding structures, he had to build extra sidewalls to help the building stand firm. Upon closer inspection, he realized he would probably need to create separate roofs for the extensions. Inside, Ashila's eyes lit up when he realized he had copied the architecture of a professionally designed building, offering much greater safety than anything he could have made himself. However, he still hadn't recreated the doors and furniture, which presented him with a new challenge to complete the structure. Ashila felt satisfied as he admired his new creation. Even though it still lacked doors and wooden furniture, being able to construct a sturdy building in a single attempt was proof of his progress. Ashila considered moving his base to this new building. When he went home in a cheerful mood, he asked what was for dinner. His father told him to wait a moment, and when he asked why, Ashila noticed his father seemed a bit worried. The next morning, Ashila ran into Madak, the woodcutter, and greeted him. Madak teased him, asking what Ashila was doing up so early, and he knew there were rumors that the woodcutters were unhappy about him cutting down trees in the forest on his own. Ashila wanted to avoid unnecessary trouble with them, so he decided to talk it over with Madak, who he knew might understand and sympathize with what he was doing, especially since he supplied the wood for his magic mushrooms. Ashila gave him a bottle of good wine, and Madak happily praised it, saying it was excellent. Ashila realized that saying the woodcutters were angry was probably an exaggeration, but it was clear that his tree cutting had caused some annoyance. Ashila understood that the lumberjacks were unhappy he was cutting down so many trees. He discussed with Madak the possibility of reducing the number of trees harvested or moving deeper into the forest so as not to affect their income. Madak agreed that it was a good idea, but he stressed that the real issue wasn't just about their livelihood. Madak explained that he was replacing manual labor with magic and work beasts, making the lumberjacks feel threatened and worried about their profits. But, he added, what he was truly hurting was their pride and dignity. These lumberjacks were born into woodcutting families, raised to be lumberjacks, and have dedicated their entire lives to this work. To them, the trees aren't just a livelihood, they're a precious asset. Madak asked Ashila what he would think of someone who cut down trees carelessly, only to let them rot without being used. He explained that Ashila's actions, felling trees without using them all or letting them get damaged, only made him seem like someone who disrespected their profession and the values and pride that defined their lives. Madak hoped Ashila would understand that their work is more than just a job. It's a tradition and a source of pride passed down through generations. Ashila fell silent, realizing he had unintentionally hurt the lumberjacks. Even though they understood he was clearing trees to develop the land, they were still unhappy with how he was doing it. Madak explained that they just wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions, not to oppose him outright. Ashila felt disappointed in himself, realizing he'd been so focused on development that he'd overlooked the people around him. Perhaps his father had noticed the lumberjack's dissatisfaction and had tried to warn him before the problem got worse. Seeing Ashila lost in thought, Madak realized that even with his extraordinary abilities, the young man was still willing to listen to the opinions of others. Afterward, Ashila asked Madak if he would like to help out with his work. When he saw Madak's surprise, he explained that he wanted to start managing the forest more responsibly. Ashila knew the northern forest was vast, so vast that many who got lost in it never returned. Although he didn't know its exact size, he was aware that unsustainable development would lead to serious consequences. With a combination of magic and his Valkyries, he could reduce the forest area quickly. However, he was worried about environmental degradation. If the forest was destroyed without any control, the soil would lose its ability to retain water and nutrients, causing erosion and potentially turning the entire region into a desert. The most pressing issue was that the firewood supply could run out if they continued logging without a sustainable plan. Without enough wood for heat, the entire village wouldn't survive the harsh winter. With these thoughts in mind, Ashila resolved to manage the forest more sustainably and carefully. He hoped that together with Madak, they could develop the area without harming the natural ecosystem. By planting trees with proper spacing to absorb enough sunlight, creating a stable supply of quality timber. Ashila admitted that he knew about growing vegetables and wheat, but he didn't know much about forestry. He suggested it would be very helpful to have experts like Madak and the other lumberjacks assist with this. Ashila felt excited, believing this arrangement would advance his development plans while also satisfying the lumberjacks he respected and protecting the forest. Madak expressed concern, saying that the power of nature shouldn't be controlled by humans. But he also acknowledged that Ashila clearly understood the benefits of forest management. He suggested Ashila discuss it further with the others. In the end, Madak convinced everyone that this agreement was better than letting Ashila do as he pleased. They reached an initial consensus to monitor the situation. Through these events, Ashila realized that the area north of the village would likely fall under his management. He was happy to see that a village-wide consensus on managing the forest had been established. Madak was very impressed by the amount of wood in the cart, remarking that if Ashila had this much lumber, he could significantly expand his magic mushroom cultivation. Ashila was pleased to see that entrusting the forest management to Madoc was already yielding good results. He assigned the task of making doors, cabinets, and other wooden furniture to skilled carpenters, while Beto was in charge of the turnip and vegetable fields. Surprisingly, the number of people joining the work had increased, and Beto turned out to be excellent at managing everyone. When Ashila asked where Beto was, people said he had gone to practice riding the work beasts. Ashila was surprised to realize that these people had gathered to lighten his workload. He apologized for letting them carry the burden, but they reassured him that helping in the fields was beneficial for them too. As they received a share of the harvest, one person in the group mentioned that the children who lost their parents in the war and those who were unemployed due to the lack of jobs in the village were very grateful for this opportunity. Ashila reflected and realized that in the past, he would have probably only thought about rewarding those he hired. He felt proud seeing how well Beto was handling personnel management and organizing the labor. Thanks to this change, he could focus more on developing the project, raising animals for work, and growing magic mushrooms. But now, he understood the greater meaning of creating opportunities for everyone in the village to work together and benefit from their labor. With all these changes and developments, Ashila had turned 8 years old. But suddenly, he heard news that the field had been ravaged. Beto told him they had found wild boar tracks everywhere. Ashila wondered if a whole herd of boars had been lured by the taste of the radishes, but he remained calm, thinking it wasn't too big of a deal. Beto was furious, not understanding why he was so calm, and insisted it was a serious problem, because some villagers were refusing to work out of fear of the wild boars. Ashila recalled that in his past life, there had also been news about wild boars destroying fields. Even when traps were set, the boars were often smart enough to avoid them, so this problem really had no easy solution. He felt guilty that his expansion into the forest might have caused this problem. He also remembered Madoc mentioning that wild boars would be attracted to newly cleared lands. Ashila felt a pang of guilt as he realized that expanding into the forest had affected the ecosystem. Many areas had been cleared of trees, and the disruption to the food chain had caused animals to lose their territory. He worried that if the boars got used to the sweet taste of the crops, they would continue to destroy the fields for generations to come. As the one overseeing this area, and for the sake of the people working in the fields, Ashila knew he had to act. Ashila realized he needed to find a viable solution to protect the field from the wild boars, not just for his project, but for the benefit of everyone in the village. When he arrived at the field, Ashila was stunned to see a giant wild boar roaming about, its hide so thick that even an arrow couldn't pierce it. He asked Beto in confusion what they should do, and Beto replied that Ashila was the one who needed to solve this problem. Ashila thought about asking for help from the nobility to eliminate the beast, but Madoc said the nobles would just tell them to handle it themselves. In the end, Ashila decided he would face the wild boar as planned with Valkyrie. He steeled himself, growing tense as he realized the sheer size of the beast even from a distance. Determined to protect the crops and everyone's safety, Ashila prepared to face this challenge. Ashila realized that if the giant boar charged them, they wouldn't get away with just a few scratches. It would be the end if the beast's tusks hit them. He climbed onto Valkyrie's back, feeling a sense of warmth and reassurance as she seemed to be waiting for him to calm down. Valkyrie started to run, gradually picking up speed, the wind whistling past Ashila's ears, making it difficult to aim at the target. While rushing forward at high speed, Ashila came up with a plan. He would use a scattershot rock spell to damage the boar. However, because he wasn't directly touching the ground, the spell's power was weakened. As the wild boar roared, Ashila realized they needed to move quickly. The boar began to chase them, running incredibly fast and maintaining a steady distance from Valkyrie. Ashila broke into a smile and shouted, announcing that everything was going according to plan. He noticed Valkyrie was moving with a complete understanding of his intentions, and felt that she was truly a reliable partner. Suddenly, Valkyrie leaped high into the air, reaching the altitude of birds in flight. Ashila asked in amazement if they were flying. Just then, Valkyrie landed on the ground with tremendous force, making Ashila keenly aware of her extraordinary power. He realized that Valkyrie possessed incredible physical abilities, which gave them a better chance in the challenging battle ahead. Ashila wondered if magically enhancing their physical attributes could take him and Valkyrie to a whole new level. As he got off Valkyrie's back, he saw a large pit in the middle of the forest, the trap he had set for the giant wild boar. The wild boar had fallen into the pit and was bleeding. Ashila felt a bit sad seeing the sight, but he told himself that only powerful attacks could pierce its thick hide. The only way to defeat it was to combine earth magic with Valkyrie's speed to create this effective trap. And that was how the first battle of Ashila's life ended. Madoc was astonished to hear that Ashila had actually taken down the giant wild boar, and Ashila said that everything would be fine from now on. But Beto disagreed and asked him if he really thought there was only one giant boar. Ashila started to worry when he heard that, and Baito explained that many other large boars were still ravaging the fields. He said that if any more appeared, he would leave them to Ashila. Ashila panicked at this, protesting that dealing with the wild boars was too scary and difficult. But after that conversation, he became the one primarily responsible for handling the giant wild boars, ready to protect the crops and the village's safety from this new threat. When the giant wild boars appeared, Ashila started using the scattershot spell to attack from a distance, realizing that it was extremely dangerous to let these beasts get close. After taking down the first wild boar and a few others, he used this opportunity to hone his magical attack abilities. He practiced shooting arrow-shaped stones from a distance of 20 to 30 meters while riding a Valkyrie, knowing that the attack's power would weaken at a distance. Turning Scatter Shot into a systematized spell went smoothly, but Ashila realized that preparing giant pit traps and luring the wild boars into them every time they appeared was incredibly troublesome. So he decided to stop taking down the wild boars this way, recognizing that he needed a more sustainable method to deal with the long-term threat posed by the giant wild boars. Ashila realized that instead of taking down each giant wild boar individually, a better solution was to build a solid defense system for the fields. He considered erecting a defensive wall, a measure thought to be the most effective against external threats. In his view, it was important to ensure that the workers could rely on the walls as a safe barrier. Ashila decided to build walls along the boundary between the forest and the current fields, as well as the areas planned to become fields in the future. While checking the old trap, he noticed a large dent in the wall where a giant wild boar had charged with its full strength. For Ashila, being thoroughly prepared was always better than being careless. So he decided to build the walls taller and thicker than necessary to stop boars up to 3 meters high, giving everyone enough time to retreat safely. Ashila began building the wall, making it quite thick, and filling the inside with sand, although he wasn't sure if this method would be effective. He could erect about 5 meters of wall at a time, so he would need to create many sections and connect them. Just like when he created the inn, Ashila felt as though his magic capacity increased every time he completed a major construction. Looking out at the fields, he had a hunch that he could build an enormous structure in a single go, a promising feeling for the grand plans ahead. Ashila felt overwhelmed looking at the immense size of the defensive wall he planned to build. It was so long he couldn't see the end. Just thinking about the work was exhausting. If the World Create spell were already complete, things might have been easier, but turning a spell into a complete incantation required a lot of time and effort. He needed to cast the exact same spell repeatedly after chanting to solidify the image and conditions of the magic. The hardest part was executing the spell with perfect precision. It had taken Ashila several months to figure out how to create the brick-making spell, and now he had to mumble to himself, performing it over and over again. But this time, the World Create spell was completed even faster than Scattershot. Just like in the experiment to recreate the inn, Ashila infused mana into the structure and applied a memory preservation spell to its shape, which made repeating the spell much easier. And he turned it into an incantation faster than before. Ashila was astonished to find that the horned Valkyries, who still had their horns after the naming ceremony, could also use the spells he had mastered. Afterward, he took 5 of the horned Valkyries with him, preparing to continue building this massive defensive wall to protect the crops and the village from external threats. Ashila, after finishing the 4-kilometer defensive wall on all 4 sides, rested with the Valkyries to recover their magic power. He fed the Valkyries magic mushrooms as a substitute for the magic recovery potions he didn't know how to make yet. The mushrooms proved to be quite effective, helping the whole team recover quickly. When Ashila asked Beto about the wall, Beto praised the structure as magnificent but pointed out that he hadn't made any gates. Ashila was stunned to realize he had forgotten this crucial part. Beto suggested he also make a road leading to the gates to make them easier to find. Previously, Ashila had created a few temporary paths, but they were quite rough and unsuitable for carts. Therefore, he decided to take on this challenge and create a durable road. He planned 2 entrances, one facing the village and one facing the forest area. While thinking about road materials, Ashila remembered concrete and asphalt roads, but they required regular maintenance. Then he recalled a type of road that could last for over 1,000 years, cobblestone roads like the ones from the ancient Roman Empire. Ashila decided to try this idea, hoping to create a road that was durable, easy to maintain, and suitable for the village. Ashila began building the road by digging a wide trench, lining it with stones and gravel, and then covering it with a layer of clay. However, the problem was that he could only make the road in a straight line, and with just a small deviation in the angle, the path could be off by more than 100 kilometers from the destination. This required a highly precise measurement technique. As Ashila was pondering this problem, a young boy named Carl, his youngest brother, came up and asked him why he was frowning. Ashila was surprised to see Carl, as he rarely saw him here. Carl explained that he had finished his chores at home and came here to play because everyone else in the family usually came home late from work. When Carl asked what Ashila was thinking about, Ashila sighed that the transparent glass panes he made weren't selling at all. Carl confirmed that they were taking up a lot of space in the warehouse and that their mom had been complaining about it too. Ashila was disappointed as the idea for this product had come to him while strolling through town. Carl pointed out that the villagers didn't feel the need to innovate their lives right now, and they were content with their current way of living. Ashila realized that with an economy still based on bartering goods, no one wanted to spend money on something that wasn't truly necessary. This made him think about how to create value from his product within the village's economic context. No matter how high the quality, a product won't necessarily sell well. Ashila wondered if there was any product he could sell. Carl suggested that if Ashila wanted to, he could sell the beautiful pieces of furniture in the warehouse, because the fragrant smell of the wood had drawn Carl in. Ashila listened to Carl and remembered that the lumberjacks in the village didn't sell the furniture they made, possibly because it was too heavy to move. Since the villagers cherished their belongings, the demand for new furniture here wasn't high. The only way to sell furniture would probably be to sell it to neighboring towns. But because the cost of renting draft animals was so expensive, few people could afford to transport the goods. However, the idea of selling furniture excited Ashila. He decided to discuss it with the lumberjacks because selling furniture might just be an interesting idea. Ashila thought to himself that he had always wanted a product that didn't depend on his magic. And though it might sound a bit extreme, if he weren't here, the village could face economic collapse. With the land now expanded to the point of surplus, he needed to start thinking about creating a stable source of income for everyone around him. If he wanted to start a furniture business, Ashila would need to set up a workshop, hire people, and create products. This meant establishing a company to manage production and distribution. Carl strongly encouraged Ashila, saying that he could definitely do it. Ashila asked Carl if he could continue to do many things in the future, and Carl replied that he was still just a kid and for now, he should just keep having fun. Carl reminded him that Ashila was only 2 years older than him. Ashila realized that was true. Carl then asked if he was teaching Baito, their older brother, how to use magic, because Carl wanted to learn magic too. Ashila recalled the time he tried to teach Baito about magic, which had made their mother unhappy. Carl was curious and wanted to know what had happened. Ashila explained that Baito had asked how he could carry so much despite his smaller frame. That's when Ashila had started using physical enhancement magic and experimented on his own body to test its effects. Baito was fascinated and wanted to know if others could gain the same benefits. So Ashila began teaching Baito how to summon and use mana. However, Baito didn't have a natural aptitude for magic that enhanced the body from the soul's core. Even so, after learning physical enhancement magic, Baito continued to practice his skills and improve his physical condition. In a short amount of time, Baito successfully mastered physical enhancement magic, which showed his potential for developing physical strength. Baito started picking fights with the other kids in the village. And although Ashila didn't know why, he knew kids often argued over petty things. Baito had become an invincible warrior in the eyes of his peers, which made some of the other kids dislike him and even call on older kids for help. Despite that, Baito still beat them all. Ashila commented that Baito's magic couldn't possibly have strengthened him that much. The reality was that Baito already had a larger build than the other kids, and he believed Baito was strong from the start. However, recently Baito had started coming home with more bruises, because the older kids couldn't win one-on-one and had started ganging up on him. Even so, Baito wasn't discouraged and kept fighting persistently, despite being defeated multiple times. Through these many confrontations, Baito's fighting ability steadily improved. Their mother would shed tears, wondering if she was a good mother, as she watched Baito constantly stir up trouble and neglect his chores, despite being told off many times. It broke her heart, and she often cried. Baito no longer had any rivals in the village. and Carl was surprised to hear about all this. Ashila said this was why he didn't want to teach magic irresponsibly. But if Carl still wanted to learn, he was willing to teach him because Carl was a smart kid, completely different from Baido, who only focused on strength. Carl was surprised and happy to hear that. Ashila began to guide him on how to focus mana in his brain. Ashila explained to Carl that concentrating mana in the brain could help enhance memory, calculation skills, and thinking ability, as well as other brain functions. Ashila thought to himself that even though he'd learned a lesson from teaching Baido magic, he didn't regret it. Baido's ability to communicate and manage people was largely thanks to his fighting skills. But Ashila wanted Carl to develop his intellectual abilities rather than his physical strength. Ashila hoped Carl could learn to read and do math to become the manager the village desperately needed. If Carl succeeded, he would be able to help Ashila with his work. A man approached the forest wanting to meet the person who had taken down the giant boar. The man introduced himself as Gran, a traveler who specialized in crafting items. Gran said he had heard rumors that the village had subdued the giant boars and came here to confirm it. Ashila asked if Gran came from the east and Gran confirmed it, explaining that his homeland was in the eastern lands. Ashila then asked if it was an island nation. Gran replied that it wasn't exactly an island nation and asked if Ashila knew of such a place. Ashila became flustered and refused to explain further, telling Gran not to worry about it. Then, he invited Gran to see the carcass of the giant boar. Although it wasn't intact, Gran could still take a look if he wanted. Gran thanked him and expressed his desire to meet the one who had defeated the giant boar, asking Ashila if he knew where that person was. Ashila revealed that he was the one who did it, surprising Gran to see it was just a child. Ashila explained that he had used a trap and had a partner helping him. However, Gran didn't believe him, saying Ashila must be mistaken, as he'd heard the giant boars were very aggressive and had even attacked a village near the northern forest. Baido chimed in, asking if they were just very large pigs and wondering why Gran wanted to see their carcasses. Gran explained that giant boars have the ability to harden their bodies, and Ashila realized this was why arrows couldn't penetrate their hides. Gran confirmed this and added that they could create various items from creatures that could use magic. Hearing this, Ashila excitedly asked if it was possible to create a weapon harder than metal from the giant boar's tusks. Ashila breathed a sigh of relief for having kept the tusks instead of throwing them away. Gran smiled, saying he had wandered all over in search of special materials for crafting. When Ashila asked if Gran could make a weapon from the giant boar's tusks, Gran nodded in confirmation. Ashila's eyes lit up, and he offered to commission him, ready to pay for the work. Ashila showed Gran the pair of tusks and asked for his opinion. Gran touched them and exclaimed that they were magnificent, truly the tusks of a magical creature. He even noticed traces of mana on them, indicating that Ashila had defeated the beast while it was using magic. When Ashila asked for more details, Gran explained that if you defeat a creature while it's casting magic, the materials obtained have a much better mana conductivity than ordinary weapons. Ashila joyfully asked if this meant Gran could create extremely powerful weapons from these giant boar tusks. Gran confirmed that the boar tusks could be used to create very powerful weapons. However, he explained that to turn a magical material into a weapon, you need the proper facilities and a catalyst. And this village had neither, so crafting it was impossible. Ashila asked specifically what was needed, and Gran said he needed a furnace capable of controlling high temperatures and a mana core from a magical creature as a catalyst. Ashila understood what a furnace was, but asked in confusion what a mana core was. Gran explained that it's a part of a magical creature, essential for using magic, and each creature has a different type of mana core, which are very rare and hard to find. At that moment, Ashila took out the Valkyrie's horn and asked if it could be a substitute for the mana core. Gran looked closely, treating the horn like a precious artifact. After examining it, Gran said that although he could only guess, it was likely this horn could be used as a mana core, which left Ashila both surprised and thrilled. Gran asked if the horns were from a working beast, and Ashila was surprised to confirm that Gran knew about them. Gran then asked if those beasts were capable of using magic, and Ashila confirmed they were. Gran explained that a working beast capable of using magic is considered a first-rate product, leaving Ashila stunned. Gran said the last thing they needed was a furnace that could withstand high temperatures. They would also need other materials and tools, but the furnace was the essential element. Ashila proposed that he would try to make a furnace, and that the bricks he had made had better heat resistance than clay, although he didn't know exactly how much heat they could withstand. Ashila was willing to try if it meant they could craft the weapon. Gran said that even if they could build a furnace to hold the fire, they would need wind to increase the temperature, and therefore they'll need a pair of bellows. Ashila was disappointed and asked again, "Aren't bellows made of wood?" Since he could only handle earth, Ashila felt disheartened. Gran grabbed him and encouraged him, saying he'd never be able to make a good weapon if he gave up now, then suggested they do it together. Ashila managed to create a furnace along with a foot-powered bellows system. Exhausted but proud, Ashila received praise from Gran, who said the furnace and bellows were a masterpiece in the workshop. Just as he was about to rest, Ashila heard Gran say the work wasn't over. He needed to make charcoal to fire the furnace or build another specialized kiln to produce the charcoal. Ashila felt exhausted hearing the long list of tasks. Gran explained that if they just burned firewood, it would turn to ash. And to prevent that, they needed an enclosed space that would keep air from getting in. Gran was moved to tears because after traveling across the continent, he had finally found a place that had everything he needed. He hugged the exhausted Ashila and said it was time to light the fire in the furnace, stressing that the first step is always the most important part of doing anything. Ashila looked at Gran in surprise, then shot up and ran off, shouting and asking if he was insane. There was no way he could keep up with that pace. Ashila returned home tired, and Carl asked him what had happened. Ashila suggested Carl go and help that stranger with his work. Carl asked if the stranger Ashila mentioned was Gran. Ashila stopped Carl and said that he wasn't going. But he understood that Carl was advising him for his own good. He figured having some hands-on experience would be good for Carl's future. Ashila explained that if Carl used his magic to improve his mental clarity and helped Gran, he would easily remember the work process. Carl asked if Ashila was just trying to get out of it, and Ashila replied that he had already made the kiln needed to make the charcoal. The vast forest around this village has high-quality wood, but it's a waste that no one here knows how to make high-quality charcoal. Ashila explained that if they could produce quality charcoal from this area, the value of the land would increase significantly, and suggested Carl go help Gran. Completely exhausted, Ashila asked his younger brother to take his place and help Gran. Ashila returned to his hideout and Gran greeted him cheerfully, announcing that the task was completed thanks to Carl's efforts. Worried, Ashila looked at the body lying on the ground and asked if that was Carl. Gran laughed and explained that Carl was only in charge of operating the bellows. As Ashila approached to encourage his brother, Gran said that he had crafted many items throughout his career, but quality like this was rare. Gran then handed Ashila a sword, proudly presenting it as his finest work. Ashila gazed in awe at the pearl-white blade, which seemed to emit a faint glow. He noticed the sword was quite light, even lighter than a metal sword. Yet it was still sharp enough to cut through enemies and very durable even without a mana coating. Gran explained that Ashila could coat the sword with mana when necessary. Then Gran gave Ashila another item, a dagger made from a boarlet, emphasizing that he should carry this weapon as well. Ashila asked in surprise if the dagger was for self-defense, and Gran explained that a weapon made from a magical beast cub has a growth attribute. Gran said this dagger would absorb its user's mana and evolve on its own. When this dagger grows to the size of the greatsword Gran made, it will be much stronger. However, Gran noted that if it only absorbs mana from a single person, the dagger will grow slowly. For it to become an incredibly powerful weapon, it needs to be passed down through many generations. Gran added that in some stories, such weapons are considered treasures, known as an heirloom sword. Ashila thanked Gran, saying that he had long dreamed of having his own weapon. He felt that the sword Gran made had a special, refined beauty. Gran smiled, saying it wasn't every day that a wandering craftsman like him had the chance to work in a place with such excellent facilities. With the abundance of materials, Ashila began to think that perhaps Gran had studied at a proper academy, rather than inventing his own techniques. Gran smiled and said that he was lucky to have met Ashila. Ashila suggested that if possible he should stay and continue crafting items, as there were still plenty of beast fangs and it would be very helpful if Gran made more swords. Gran explained that with magic weapons, they're usually named after their creator. He suggested naming the sword Kugaken Guran, and Ashila agreed, promising he would take good care of it. This was the first time Ashila had owned a real weapon. After that, he ran over to Carl, gave him the magic mushrooms, and told Carl to chew on them to recover. Gran was amazed to see so many magic mushrooms, since they were such a rare resource. Ashila added that while magic mushrooms weren't related to smithing, they were a common catalyst in magic crafting. Gran joyfully said that this place was truly a dreamland for craftsmen. Ashila thought that before, if he hadn't had enough magic mushrooms to harvest, he would have had a hard time using them as a catalyst. But now, with help from the woodcutters and the rich supply of wood in the area, he was able to research and increase the mushroom's production. He realized that by implanting mushroom spores into logs, he could harvest them within a few years. However, Ashila said he didn't mind if Gran used the mushrooms for crafting weapons, just asking him not to use too many. Gran realized that these mushrooms were the ingredient for making mana recovery potions. Ashila confessed that he didn't know how to make potions, and just chewed the dried mushrooms to restore his mana. Hearing that, Gran offered to make mana potions from the mushrooms for him. Ashila was very surprised to learn that Gran could make potions. Gran explained that even if he wanted to use the mushrooms as a catalyst, it was better to process them into mana potions first. Ashila asked to watch the process, and Gran agreed, wanting him to participate to feel the joy of creation. Gran woke Carl up, but he was still exhausted and needed more rest. Afterward, Ashila and Gran got to work making the mana potions. The finished product had a tea-like flavor, created by extracting the magic mushrooms and grinding them into a powder, then pouring it into boiling water and stirring well. Gran said that thanks to the charcoal keeping the temperature stable, they were able to successfully brew this high-quality potion. Gran said that this time he planned to make defensive armor, using the hide of a giant boar to create leather armor, which made Ashila very excited. Gran explained that he needed to soak the hide in seawater for a few days to turn it into a magical item. While it wouldn't be as effective as the Kugaken Guran made from a fang, it would be much sturdier than most ordinary leather armor. Ashila praised Gran for his diverse crafting skills, and thanked him for coming to the village. Gran smiled and told Ashila to get ready to stay up late for the next few days. Ashila felt a bit down and thought that Gran would be a wonderful person if he didn't accidentally rob people of their sleep. Gran told him to start working immediately. Ashila was secretly proud of having created the meditation spell earlier, a spell that helped him recover his strength after a night's sleep. Ashila thought that without the meditation spell, he probably would have collapsed from overwork. After a short while, the leather armor was finished. Gran commented that it looked great, but it wasn't Ashila's size and asked if that was okay. Ashila happily replied that if the armor was made to his current size, he wouldn't be able to wear it when he grew up. Ashila added that, regardless of the armor, Gran had helped a lot by dividing the work among the farmers, and he was happy just to be measured for it. Gran assured him that he would make a new set of armor for Ashila when he had the time. When Gran asked what they should craft next, a tired Ashila found that cruel. Carl interrupted and suggested they should stop, asking why Gran didn't teach the craftsmen how to make the products to lighten the load. Gran said with disappointment that he preferred making new products to training other people. Ashila realized that Gran loved creating new things that stimulated his creativity. Therefore, he proposed a new task, to build a large structure. Ashila realized that Gran couldn't exceed the number of available bricks, and if Gran created a structure with this number of bricks, it would be within the limits of his memory conservation skill, allowing him to recreate it with magic. Ashila said that if Gran could create a magnificent house for himself with those bricks, he could use magic to recreate it later. Additionally, Gran was allowed to use mortar, and the house should be designed to be habitable. Gran heard about the limitations and grew excited, seeing it as an interesting challenge, and got to work. Ashila succeeded in keeping Gran busy and decided to experiment with something on his own. He noticed that the Kugaken blade Gran had created from the giant boar's tusk, and the Valkyrie's horn already possessed the harden ability. This made him curious whether he could discover more effects from other materials. Ashila gathered the materials: a mana potion, a heat-resistant brick, clay from his magic, a Valkyrie's horn, and a giant boar's tusk. To create the core material, he had to break down the heat-resistant brick into clay and then fire it. Using knowledge from his past life, Ashila mixed the ground heat-resistant brick, the horn, and the tusk into the clay. In addition, he poured a boiled mana potion into the mixture, creating multiple samples with different ratios of each ingredient. After carefully shaping them, he put them into the kiln, but the initial results were not as he expected. Determined to improve, he adjusted the amount of mana potion and the required time, then focused his strength on compressing it. Finally, he created an extremely durable brick. Unlike the previous reddish-brown bricks, this one had a color like marble. This was his new invention, the hardened brick. Looking at his creation, Ashila realized that just by adding a catalyst and special ingredients, he could create such a high-class material. He also began to understand why Gran was so passionate about crafting. Because he could only use earth-related magic, Ashila had always yearned to create bricks as durable as metal. No matter how many times he tried to imagine it, his bricks still fell short. Ashila thought that the memories and mindset from his past life were limiting his creativity, so he needed to experiment himself to create a brick with the hardness of metal. After concentrating and using his memory conservation skill, he developed a spell to create hardened bricks, based on the structural creation logic he had used before. In the end, he had created a new spell called Hardened Brick Creation, which allowed him to make durable bricks without needing the horns or tusks of magical creatures, and he found it truly magical. These bricks looked more like marble flooring than Roman-style paving stones. To create a Roman-style paved road, he used the road placement spell and experimented with the hardened bricks. Afterward, he wondered if he should raise the sides of the road to ensure pedestrian safety. Ashila was astonished by the structure Gran had built. The space was larger than he had imagined, and Gran explained that he had installed many windows to save on building materials. Ashila was surprised to see an arched doorway and even glass window panes. Gran mentioned he got the idea after hearing Carl talk about the glass panes Ashila had left in storage because they couldn't be sold. Looking at the arch, Ashila thought that by using this architectural style he could save materials and increase the structure's durability, an optimal solution when using stone, as it has high compressive strength. Ashila praised Gran, saying the building was amazing, more spacious than the inn, and felt open thanks to the windows. Gran was pleased, and Ashila said he was willing to pay any price he named. Gran said that instead of a reward, he wanted the right to build his own house. Ashila was surprised to hear that and asked for more details. Gran explained that although he was a traveler, he wanted a place to stay without worry. And he felt that by staying with Ashila, he would always be involved in interesting events. Ashila thought about how, after enclosing the fields with a wall, he had received many requests from other people wanting to live in the area. But because the Valkyries also lived here, he had refused them all. However, it wasn't every day you met a craftsman as talented as Gran, so if that was his wish, he would accept it. Gran thanked him, and with that, he became the first person to live in Ashila's territory. During dinner, Ashila wondered why his mother's cooking was always so delicious, which was why he was still at home instead of living in a lodging house. His eldest brother Hector had gotten married, quite early at the age of 14, even for this world, and their house was getting more and more crowded. Because their house was getting cramped, Ashila's family had to expand the storage shed to use as temporary living space. In this world, it was a given that the eldest son would inherit the house and the land. If their father, the head of the family, passed away, the house and land would be passed down to Ashila's older brother and then on to his son. If the other brothers couldn't find work, they would stay at home and work for the family. His family got along well, so Ashila wanted to stay with them for as long as possible. However, Ashila had been preparing to become independent since he was 5 years old, so he decided to leave his parents' home. First, he prepared the land in the development area and moved the base near the southern wall to the center of the plot. Then, he would recreate Gran's house design using the same amount of mana as he did for the lodging house. This time, he changed the material from regular bricks to hard bricks. Ashila built 4 1-kilometer-long walls surrounding his house, then paved roads from the center of the plot and connected them to the 4 outer walls. He set aside the land to the south, near the road leading to the village, for Gran to build his own house. Gran turned out to be a true creative fanatic. As soon as he received the land, he immediately started building his own house. Ashila built a few lodging house-style homes along the southern road for Beto. Beto wanted to leave home too, so he shared his new house with his friends and decided to rent out the empty rooms to people who wanted to work in the fields. Ashila decided the northern forest would be a forestry area, with lumber management and charcoal production to be located in the northeast section, supported by woodcutters like Madak and the carpenters who had moved there. The northeast section was an area that would still need further development in the future. The central area was Ashila's house, the Valkyries' residence, and the magic mushroom cultivation area. He kept the horned Valkyries in the central area and had them take care of incubating the eggs. Just as he had planned for the land's development, by the time everything was ready for the move to the new house, he was 9 years old. The merchant, who was astonished to hear that Ashila had given a piece of land to a stranger, and wondered why he hadn't said anything to him. Ashila replied that he thought a traveling merchant wouldn't need land, but the merchant said he didn't plan to be a traveling merchant forever and wanted his own shop. Therefore, he wanted Ashila to give him a plot of land. Then, the merchant suddenly looked at Ashila and said that he had lied about not having any work beasts that could use magic, which left him flustered, explaining that he didn't know the Valkyries could use magic and didn't think it was rare. But he only sold Valkyries with their horns cut, so none of those could use magic. Selling Valkyries that could use magic was fraught with risks. Ashila agreed and said he would let the merchant open a shop there, and that he really hoped it would be a food store. The merchant said he would think about it, since it seemed Ashila trusted him to some extent. Then, the merchant mentioned that there were rumors about a dangerous group of people on that land. Ashila was confused and asked what he meant, and the merchant said that they were talking about him, that he was the one considered dangerous. Ashila was surprised to hear that, but he said that he hadn't done anything dangerous. The merchant went on to say that, if you thought about it, the nobility ruling the area might feel uneasy about a giant fortress surrounded by massive walls suddenly being built. He reminded him that it was almost time to pay taxes, so the tax collectors would be coming soon, and Ashila would have to be prepared to answer their questions. Even though you had a land development permit. Anyway, when they collected taxes last year, they didn't say much. But this time, Ashila was stunned to hear that his land would be declared the property of the Fontana clan. They would seize it by force and arrest him if he tried to resist. Poll taxes and land taxes were usually paid with the annual wheat harvest. The villages would collect the wheat at the village chief's house and send a representative to meet the tax collector. Ashila pays his taxes in gold, so the tax collectors have to come directly to his house, which means he has to entertain them properly. He has to clean the house and prepare food. It's quite a hassle. Before, they would just come, have a meal, collect the gold, and leave. But this time, any property on the land, including personal belongings, will be considered the property of the Fontana clan. This is exactly what the merchant mentioned, about how there might be dangerous people in this area. The fact that Ashila is raising a valuable beast could be seen as a protective measure, because a rideable beast has strategic value. Although his freedom might be restricted, Ashila wouldn't have to worry about food or war, and his life would be guaranteed. He might have been satisfied with that offer if he were just a carefree child raised in a poor village. But he carries memories of a free and wealthy world, along with memories of his past life, so he decided not to accept becoming livestock, existing only to incubate eggs. Just then, Ashila heard a noise from the stable behind the house. A man appeared with a blood-stained sword. Ashila saw Carl in the stable, noticing that both Carl and Valkyrie were injured and unconscious. The stranger asked him what he was going to do, if he intended to get in his way. Then, in a fit of rage, the man raised his sword to finish Ashila off.